Let's get started.
Hello and welcome, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Heart-Centered Woman podcast. I am so excited to be starting something a little bit new here. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, you may not know, but I have started a YouTube channel. So not only do I have my recording kind of studio set up, but I've got video going on. So if you would prefer to watch me talk and all of my crazy facial expressions, which I've gotten a lot of feedback on. People tend to really enjoy those. So that is now available, the Heart-Centered Woman channel on YouTube. So welcome to all my YouTubers. And this is the first episode actually coming on to my YouTube channel. I'm very, very excited that this business just continues to expand and to grow. And in the most unique and beautiful ways. And so not only will I have my podcast on my YouTube channel, I probably will also be putting up some of my lives, my free contents, my free workshops there as well. Those have been taking place thus far inside of my Facebook group. If you are not a part of my free Facebook group, I encourage you to go check it out. It is called Heart to Heart Center, and it is just a place where I get to feel a little bit more of the encouragement and tips and tricks, and where I've had so far all of my free workshops. So definitely check that out. Request to join there. All right, so today we are continuing our series on negative self-talk, which I think is just one of the first places to start when you are trying to expand from your heart, letting go of the mind, right? You know, becoming heart-centered is about letting go of the mind, and you have to understand kind of what's going on up there to unpackage it and to let go of a lot of it. So last episode, we talked about why words matter and the power that they have. Some of you gave me some feedback that you didn't quite know, what quantum mechanics and quantum theory is now really telling us about the shape of our reality and how our words and our brain waves really make a huge difference in the reality that we experience here, right? I'm a huge believer that we are spiritual beings in a human experience. And that the physical world that we see with our senses is a very, very, very small portion of what is actually happening around us, okay? And so understanding the power of words and the power of our minds and our thoughts and how they impact us and our life is a huge part of bettering our human experience. So today we're going to talk about what negative self-talk is. Some of this might surprise you a little bit as to what is all included in negative self-talk, because it's not just what normal people think. And then, of course, where it comes from. And we're going to unpackage this, and I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a bold talk. So get ready, right? So really talking about, I've got my notes here because I like taking some bullet point notes because I have a lot to say and I want to make sure that I go over it. So if you don't see me looking at the screen, I'm looking at my notes. But yeah, so what negative self-talk is and what is really included inside of that. This can be anything that is basically negative oriented, right? It's not just the name calling or the put downs that we might kind of generally associate with negative self-talk. This is going to be anything you think or say that comes from a place of won't work or I can't. That is included in negative self-talk, right? It's a limiting mindset, belief system, things that over focus on your fears. Right? Limiting beliefs, fear, irrational fears. These are all types of our negative self-talk. And the limitations that they really put on us. Anything that focuses on your flaws or your faults instead of the amazing, beautiful, sparkly person that you are, that one I think is more obvious when we think about what is negative self-talk. It is, us choosing to focus on what is going wrong versus what's going right, what we don't like versus what we do like. And we're giving a lot of attention and energy to that. Cognitive distortions is a type of negative self-talk as well. And this, there are about 10 different types. I will probably have an entire series on what these are, what these look like, how to overcome them. But this is like 0 to 60 thinking, black and white thinking, mind reading, fortune telling, all of these really false belief systems that have us jump to conclusions and just tell ourselves these really negative stories about the world and reality when it usually is not the case. It is a complete distortion, right? A cognitive distortion of reality that you're coming up in your mind. I suffered from this for a long time in many different ways, but one of the most notable ones was my body image. I was diagnosed with body dysmorphic disorder, where who I saw in the mirror was not who I really was. I was distorting the picture in the mirror in my own personal frame. All right, when I saw myself, my husband now was my boyfriend then. It was like, what in the world do you mean? You are fat. And of course I look back at pictures and I'm like, I was crazy. That's a form of negative self-talk, right? Calling myself crazy. But I really was. I really had just it's an illness. I had an illness and a way of thinking and distorting my body. So cognitive distortions are distorting realities, right? They're distorting situations that we're involved in, or escalating fears, irrationality, okay? All of this really is encompassed into our negative self-talk. And negative self-talk just isn't our thoughts. This is also, what we say out loud to other people. And sometimes, I'm really good now at catching this. And I have to walk a very fine line sometimes of not pointing it out to people, like understanding when and where it is okay to point it out. And other times of letting it slide, because now it hits me like a slap in the face. I'm like, oh God, why are you saying that about yourself? Don't call yourself that. So recognizing it is something you will do more and more and more as you really start to bring your attention and your awareness to this and educate yourself on what it looks like. Okay, so what it sounds like, right, is name calling. Obviously, anytime you call yourself a negative word like stupid or fat, pointing out your flaws, obviously those are a form. I can't, definitely. Overgeneralizations of the negative. So things like nothing is ever going to work out for me. It's going to be one of those days. Why should I even try? Everything I eat goes to my waist or my hips or my butt or whatever it is you say, ladies. Form of negative self-talk. Or that's easy for you to say, right? I think that's a phrase some people have a habit of saying, and negative thinking it does become a habit. Or what about my kids or my spouse or my in-laws or insert whatever here, my boss is driving me crazy. Being overly critical of other people, gossiping, these are also versions of negative self-talk. When we are negatively oriented or critical about other people, it's usually a very good indicator that we're doing that on the inside to us as well. I don't know a person who has really good, healthy self-talk that also is critical and gossips. Generally speaking, those of us who've done the work to get to a more positive place in our mind have a lot more kindness and compassion and empathy. That's really what, this addresses. And one of the benefits of is it increases that capacity to have that compassion towards other people. So being overly critical of others is a type of negative self-talk. And every time you repeat these things, okay, in these phrases, you have to understand the absolute power you're giving them. Not only is this rewiring your brain, right? In the last episode, we talked about laying down these roadmaps inside your brain between 2 points. Every thought does that. The more you repeat that thought, the stronger that road gets, okay? So it might just at first be a walked pathway through some grass, and if you continue on thinking that thought over time, it's going to become a super highway, and that just leads you to more and more negative thinking. Another thing that, have to continue to to help you guys really realize the implications of is that the more we repeat these things to ourselves, the more they become our reality, okay? Quantum physics is science-based. This isn't like, I don't know, just law of attraction, woo-woo stuff that I think a lot of people associate with it. Like there's no science behind things like manifestation. Just go look at Dr. Joe Dispenza. He is one of many, many facilitators out there doing the science work, doing the scientific experiments, having these crazy, incredible machines. I don't know. I don't get that whole part of it. I'm a conceptualized person, but have these incredible machines that actually can quantify and calculate and look at and analyze and monitor all of this data, right? So it is both rewiring your brain and creating your reality, and it's the perspective you're choosing to put on. It's the lenses you're choosing to see the world through, which again goes back into things like self-fulfilling prophecies. Okay. And I'm guilty of these things too. When I was doing writing my notes for this, and I looked up some examples of negative self-talk. One of the ones I saw, right, that I wrote down was, my kids are driving me crazy, or my spouse is driving me crazy. And I'm like, oh, sometimes I'm so guilty of this too. Because I get overstimulated really easily. I'm a sensitive person. I don't like loud noises, and anytime I'm in an environment with a lot of people, or I love my kids, but even when they are, they're screaming and they're laughing and they're having so much fun, I get overstimulated really, really easily. And I can have that thought like, oh, this is just driving me crazy. And I've picked up on this. Oh, hold on. Sometimes my recording platform, come back down here, freezes up on me. All right, let's pick back up where we were. Counting me in. So yeah, I'm guilty of this thought too. And sometimes, or once I was, really putting all this information together, working on my course material for becoming heart-centered, I really realized, oh, I do this. I realized that even though most of my self-talk is very positive, there were just like these few small places where I was repeating these stories to myself. One of them being about my children, being crazy because they are loud. Beautiful toddlers, my daughter is 2.5, my son is 5, like they're being kids, right? And thankfully I realized that. So even though I internally feel the stress response, which we're gonna unpack where this comes from in a second, but I'll give you a spoiler alert. For me, this comes from a place of my childhood where that wasn't allowed. I got in trouble for being too noisy or too messy or too silly, or being a kid, right? Growing up with in a domestic violence situation with narcissistic parents who were emotionally immature, like you name it. Unfortunately, I've been through it. And so when I hear that, right, because I was used to being punished for it, it sends a stress response in my body. And if I wasn't aware of that, unfortunately, I would end up repeating those behaviors of getting on to my kids and making them be quiet and making them sit down, and and so I'm just thankful that I'm aware of it. And that is the power behind a lot of this work, is when you understand what your negative self-talk looks like and where it comes from, you also understand what it's doing to the relationships around you, right? So let's go into that of what are all the implications of negative self-talk. And I think this is important to realize because, again, this is like a motivational factor for you to do the hard work. I will never be the one to tell you that taking control of your life and healing is easy. Oh my gosh, no. I will set you up with realistic expectations. But you know what is harder? Living in chronic emotional pain. Way harder than walking through a healing journey. way harder, and I know from experience. So what are all the implications of our negative self-talk and how it really does impact our life? Well, I mean, it sets you up for failure, because most of your self-talk, I can't, this won't work, etc., is predicting, expecting failure. So you're wiring your brain to make yourself fail, and you're sending out, you know, the electromagnetic signals to the universe of like, hey, I would like to fail at this. So you're like shooting your foot before you even get started. What else? It is harmful in all of these areas. It creates perfectionism and other unrealistic expectations. It increases depression, anxiety, suicide. Obviously, it affects your mood. When you're in a negative self-talk spiral, it's going to bring up all low vibrational negative emotions like guilt and shame, embarrassment, sadness, hopelessness, right? It's obviously going to affect your mood, which the longer you stay in those states is going to lead to depression and anxiety. It damages your health and causes stress-related illnesses, which, you know, chronic stress, it can disrupt your body's hormonal balance. It can deplete your brain of all the happy neurotransmitters like your serotonin and your dopamine. It affects your gut health and your immune system, which 90% of your serotonin is made inside of your gut. So again, you know, just affecting your entire body system, and ultimately can decrease your lifespan. Lower self-esteem. It reduces your energy. Believe it or not, this takes a lot of your mental energy to continue to perpetuate this negative state. And if you are somebody who chronically feels tired and you're getting enough sleep, it could be related. I mean, there's a lot of health issues. And going into that, you know, it kind of deserves talking about like what comes first, the health issues or the thought, right? If negative thinking can create stress-related illnesses, do the stress-related illnesses create the negative thinking by putting you in such a horrible state, or are your thoughts making you sick? Your thoughts are making you sick. I was way more sick when I was just in my negative part of my life, my depressive episode. My immune system was awful back then. And I have every reason to believe it's because of the emotional state my body was in. And I really think that one of the major contributing factors to a ton of illnesses and diseases is our negative self-talk and our mental state, our emotional state, and being there for a long time. Unfortunately, this obviously becomes a vicious cycle because, you know, once you have something like Hashimoto's, like myself, right? It may be some of my negative beliefs or negative self-talk made me more susceptible to developing an autoimmune condition. Well, that autoimmune condition affects my body in that it makes me more tired and it makes me more moody and it messes with my hormones, right? So it's just like, which is going to just perpetuate, you know, this state of hopelessness and not feeling good. And when you're feeling in a funk, you're mentally not usually very compassionate or nice to yourself. So it's just like this vicious cycle. So taking control of your negative self-talk is a great way to not only heal yourself mentally and emotionally, but also physically. And maybe this is a huge part that people really miss out on when they are on a physical healing journey and dealing with things like autoimmune disease. And I think trapped emotions is obviously a very good scientifically based example of this. Trapped emotions are from the book, The Emotion Code. I forget the author's name. And Body Keeps Score is another really great one too, that talks about basically a similar idea, that emotions are energy. And unfortunately, a lot of us were never taught how to be emotionally intelligent enough to release that energy inside of us. Most of us were told to repress our emotions, like in childhood, like stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. So even though you feel like crying because you're still in that emotion, you make yourself stop. Well, that energy is not being released through the form of crying. And so it gets stuck inside of your body, and it can cause illness and aches and pains. That energy is inside your physical body, having an effect, which is negative because it's a negative emotion, right? So I think that's a really good example of how powerful your thoughts and emotions affect your body, and why this is such an important area of your life to devote time and energy into for overall health and wellness. What else do I have down here? It creates irrational fears. It decreases your outlook on life. It inhibits your ability to achieve goals, both through your perspective and the rewiring of your brain, and through quantum mechanics. It disrupts your sleep if you're somebody who deals with a lot of insomnia. I want to look into that. Let's see here. Prolonged negative thinking patterns diminishes your brain's ability to think, reason, and form memories or focus. It actually increases your chance of developing dementia. That's been studied. There is a link between negative self-talk and dementia and lack of focus. It's crazy. Obviously, too, it can ruin relationships. When you are stuck in negative self-talk with yourself, you are also more critical of others. You think like the worst of others or a situation. Again, I'm not perfect, and I will never claim to be, okay? Because your healing journey won't be perfect. You will not get to a place where you become perfect. That is not what this is about. This is about coming to a place where, one, you have a skill set, and two, most of the time, like, where is your resting state of being, emotional state of being? Mine is generally positive, okay? But that doesn't mean I never experience negative emotions, or I never have these episodes on my cycle where I get a little bit more negative about things. Totally normal to experience those in the normal ebb and flows of the human experience, okay? However, when it becomes your dominant state of being, that's when it becomes a problem worth addressing. So yeah, you can think the worst of situations. Somebody could say something to you and you take it completely the wrong way, where that was not the way they intended it to go at all. You overreacted or projected your negative self-talk onto the situation or the person. And that's obviously just going to destroy part of that relationship. And then, of course, the biggest one is that you are literally manifesting more negativity and negative things into your life. Quantum physics. What you think about shapes your reality on a atomic molecular level. You're just like becoming this magnet to all of the negative crap. So if you've been stuck in that cycle, I can guarantee you've been feeling it. If there is not a person on this planet that has got a lot of negative self-talk and not a lot of negative circumstances in their life, right? They go hand in hand because you're attracting that into your life. So let's talk about where it comes from. When we discuss where it comes from, I think it's so important because it really helps us to begin to decompartmentalize from it, to lessen the identification of it. Give me a second. A lot of times we can think that, we are just a negative person. We were just born this way, or, this is just the way it's always going to be. And when you really understand where all of this comes from and how it truly is just a program that you've been programmed to do, like a computer, a program that you can change, you can see like, oh wow, this really isn't me. This is something that was projected onto me, or just something I learned, or something I picked up along the way. It's not a true indicator of who I really am or what my soul really is, okay? So the first part of where negative self-talk comes from is what we call in psychology the negative bias, okay? We have learned through evolutionary psychology that our brains are really wired to pick up negative information more easily than positive. This is why we also have what many people call the ego or the inner critic. It is all about our survival mode and our flight or fight response. Okay, back when all we had to worry about predators in the wild and surviving, we had our brains wired to pick up on concerning information in our environments to protect us. So there is a level of this that we cannot completely get away from. Our brains are designed to keep us safe by picking up on negative stimuli more easily than positive. So there's a little bit about that. Now that doesn't mean that you could never overcome this. Because there's plenty of people who have, right? There are plenty of examples of it. But just know, like, there is that aspect to it. The second place this comes from, and this is going to ruffle feathers. It might, maybe I won't say it will. It might ruffle feathers. But I'm gonna just go ahead and tell you that this is my own figure I'm throwing out here. I'm gonna say that probably 50 to 80% of your negative self-talk stems from your childhood, usually before the age of 7. A lot of the programs that you have about the world, the belief systems, the self-talk comes from when we were children, because before the age of 7, your brain basically lives in a theta brainwave state. The theta brainwave is the same brainwave for hypnosis. It basically bypasses our logical brain and head straight into our subconscious, okay? And this is why children, like, they literally don't even have the physical capacity to have rational thought, okay? My toddler will throw a fit because the cup is the wrong color, and you would think that her toe had just been cut off. To me, I'm like, what is the big deal? Blah, 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 but I have rational thought. My children do not. And they won't develop that until about 7. And then it still takes a long time to develop fully. So they won't even like begin to develop the rationalization until later. But everything that we experience in that time frame from birth to 7 years old, everything that we hear, everything that we're exposed to, everything that we watch on TV, like all of it becomes programmed into our subconscious mind. And so even in a moderately positive household, right, of like what we would consider good parents, like probably even like me, okay, maybe me as the example, the average child will hear the phrase no, or what they cannot do or what they're not capable of doing, over 148,000 times. That's a lot. That's definitely going to have an effect. This is why I really try to refrain from saying no. One, it's a trigger. The second you tell my 2.5-year-old no, she's so headstrong, she's going to freak out on you anyway. But it also is programming that no inside of their mind. And the more that they hear the word no, the more it actually suppresses their personality, their creativity, their passions. It becomes a limiting belief system or a limited mindset. Like, there's a lot of power behind how many times kids say no and the actual effects it has on their mental state and their personality. So I try to say, you know, when she can do something, well, we can't do that right now, but you can do that after school, okay? Something like that, instead of actually saying the word no. But all of this has an effect. So the words we hear from our parents. So for those of us who grew up in really harsh environments, you know, where I heard my parents arguing, and not like productive arguments, like domestic violence, cops being called arguments. All of that had an effect on my programming. the trauma that you go through, the peer groups too, right? This isn't just about what goes on in your home as a child. It's also about being bullied, or what your peer response was at school. Teachers, right? It is so important for teachers to not label children as problematic or behavioral issues or developmental delays, and the child hearing that. Because the second the child hears that, especially from an individual in an authority figure, right? Somebody they rely on for safety and respect, they're going to take that on as their identity. If you call a child a bad kid, they will get worse. It becomes a part of their identity, and because that becomes a part of their subconscious programming, that child is now more likely to end up in jail, to have drug addiction issues, just from being labeled bad as a kid. It can truly have that profound of an effect. So if you're somebody who is working through your negative self-talk, ask yourself, when did I first hear this? When did I first hear that I was fat? Because it didn't come from you. Either somebody called you fat, or you heard your mom calling herself fat, and you picked up on that. Your parents' self-talk becomes your self-talk as well. I am so mindful of my self-talk in front of my kids. I really try to not ever say anything negative about myself in front of my kids, because I don't want them to pick that up as their own self-talk. Now, I will own up to mistakes. Like Zach and I parent in a very gentle, respectful parenting method. And so when I mess up, because again, not perfect, I will lose my shit sometimes. If I've yelled at the kids, I will come back. Here we go. Sorry about that. Let's see here. Okay. I will come back and apologize and explain to myself to the kids. Be like, I'm sorry, I got really frustrated because you were continuing to fight with each other, and I took out that frustration on you guys by yelling at you, and I'm so sorry. But that's not negative self-talk. That's not calling myself a bad parent, or talking about I feel so guilty, or I'm ashamed, or anything like that. Just really explaining what the situation was, how I felt, how I reacted, why that wasn't okay, and I'm sorry. We also try to practice Ho'oponopono, which is a whole method. I'll go into that later. But all that to say, really monitor my self-talk, because your parents' self-talk. So limiting beliefs like around money, that's a big one, a big program. This goes into like generational issues. If you heard money doesn't grow on trees, we can't afford that, that's too expensive, I guarantee right now, unless you've addressed that, you're still struggling with money. And it's not that you are incapable, or you're not smart enough, or you don't have the right knowledge or education. It is literally the mindset program that you were indoctrinated into as a child. Power of words, man. Power of words. So other than our childhood, right, and some of the things that we go through, abusive relationships can do the same thing. If you get stuck in a narcissistic or an abusive relationship, narcissist abuse is next level, because it's so sneaky and it's done in such a manipulative way, and really harnesses the fact of you are the problem. Even just 3 to 6 months in a narcissistic relationship can have profound effects on how your brain gets rewired, and emotional trauma that comes from that. So, but any type of abusive situations obviously affect our negative self-talk. TVs, music, and video games, anything, or books even, anything that we are digesting mentally is going to have an effect. When I started taking control over my anxiety and wanting to relieve myself of depression, I stopped watching scary movies. I like suspense, so I can do a little bit of like the government, CIA type suspenseful movies, but anything that is too much, like Handmaid's Tale, not watching it. I watched one episode. It wasn't even the first one. I was over at a friend's house, and she's like, watch this show with me. And I was like, no, this is not good for my mental health, because I understand that this stuff affects you on an emotional and mental level. Whether you want to understand that or believe that or not, that is 100% the case. Anything you are being exposed to is programming you, okay? Music does it, video games do it, what you hear, the conversations that you hear or are involved in do it, TV does it. These are programs. So it's important to be mindful about just the environment we allow ourselves to be in. If you've got negative and toxic friends and you spend too much time around them, that is contagious. Go live with your negative toxic friend for 2 weeks, and I guarantee you it's rubbed off, because you've constantly heard it. So it's even though it wasn't yours, your subconscious mind starts to pick up on it. It's great. Isn't this mind-blowing? It's so fascinating to me how all of this really does affect ourselves and affect us. And I got to tell you again, you know, if you are on any type of healing journey, it is so important to become aware of how these things affect you, of what kind of relationships, friendships, TV shows, conversations, environments that you become involved in, because it all becomes a part of us, okay? So that is where our negative self-talk really comes from. A lot of it stems from childhood, and the childhood stuff is harder to break than the stuff that was done as an adult, unless it was long-term abuse or trauma. Being in the military and going through war, that's enough at any age to, you know, definitely increase some negative self-talk. So any type of trauma or traumatic experience can do it, okay? So I hope that gives you some clarity and awareness for you to start kind of looking into your own negative self-talk and really thinking about, like, okay, oh, I caught myself. This is a form of it. Where did I first hear this? So where did I first hear this, and what can I do about it? What can I do to change it? Are very powerful questions to ask yourself when you're trying to be, you know, very self-aware. Sometimes why, there are studies that have shown that asking why is a fine line. It can be productive in having a healthy sense of self-awareness. And I'm going to talk a lot about this in my Becoming Heart-Centered course, of like questions to help you unpackage some of this stuff and then retrain your brain, which you don't necessarily have to unpackage these things to rewire your brain, but I do think it does more, and from my own personal experience, I can tell you it does more in the healing process when you truly unpack things and you're able to release them a little bit better. Let me give you an example. I went through I would call my first round of my healing journey back in 2010. That was really, you know, 2010, 2012 was when I did a lot to reprogram my subconscious mind. A lot of that looked like positive psychology, affirmations. I did unpackage a lot, but a lot of it was not quite as deep. Well, I went through another depressive episode with postpartum depression, and then again at the beginning of this year by being confronted by my abandonment issues. And these times around, now that I have more skills in healing and understanding, I went a little bit deeper to understand why these things bothered me, like what was going on, the things that came up during postpartum depression, you know, really diving a little bit deeper to understanding where they came from, why, you know, why this had come up. It did a lot for me in allowing myself to release it and heal it. Like, to feel it, you got to feel it to heal it. And so even though we can technically rewire our brain without doing that, I feel like we're bypassing some emotional or spiritually bypassing some of the healing process in digging up some of that stagnant old energy and allowing it to be released. Because even if you rewire your brain, that trapped emotion is somewhere inside of you, right? Or that hurt, that pain, that scar is somewhere inside of you. So yeah, going through it, you know, like I said, you don't have to unpackage it, but there can be, I think, an extra layer of healing when you do. And now that I've done that, like I was reconfronted with my abandonment issue, the healing I've got from it is just so profound. It's radically changed so many things in my life, and is a big part of why I'm showing up now and who I'm showing up as. Came from having to reconfront that trauma, and not just, you know, relying back on my neuro-linguistic programming techniques to rewire my brain, but to unpackage some of that hurt and to do other healing therapies and techniques to release it, and forgiveness and all of these other things. So that's my little spiel about unpackaging. Next week we'll talk about, not next week, next episode, we will talk about some techniques for how to reprogram your negative self-talk. I'm sure that's the one you're really waiting for. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure you follow me on social media, where I've been putting out so much more content. You can find me on TikTok or Instagram as The Heart-Centered Woman. You can find me on Facebook as just myself. Like, I show up there as myself. Heather Harrison. It's hard to miss when I've got blue hair. I do have a Facebook page, but I don't do much with it yet, as of yet. And then definitely my free group. And on Facebook, I'm almost maxed out on friends, so hit that follow button instead of become a friend. And join my free group, Heart to Heart Center, on Facebook. So I will be back soon to give you guys the techniques to change all of this for you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and you realize that whether you speak to yourself kindly or not, you are still worth the kindness and the love. Okay? Don't beat yourself up too much on realizing that you have these behaviors, which can be so easily done. We can notice that we are calling ourselves fat again, and then go into like this tirade of like, why do I do this? I can't believe I'm so stupid, and you know, just adding salt to the wound. Try repeating phrases that are loving and accepting of, I know that right now I have some negative self-talk issues, but I also know that I can change. I realize that I've not always been very kind to myself, but I also realize that I can choose something different. I know that just because I speak to myself this way right now doesn't mean that I'm always going to speak this way to myself. Those phrases of support and love are so profound. So say them to yourself, okay? I love you guys, and we will come back and chat soon. Goodbye.